James, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking your time to sit here with us. And yeah, thank you. So
great to be here with you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a short introduction about your work. So basically, I'm recording here out of Europe, and part of my mission right now is to bring functional medicine knowledge, functional medicine technology more into the mainstream over here in Europe. And for that, actually, together with my wife, we founded a digital health agency focused on communication. And so we have a few projects there on the stove cooking. But I'm really passionate about the topic of functional medicine because basically it was the technology that got me back on my feet again. So I had a chronic disease, Hashimoto's. And in 2012, I already talked about this stuff over here in Europe. At Quantified Self Amsterdam, I talked about functional medicine and biohacking. But back then, the time was not right for some reason for this knowledge to come out. But now there's a real groundswell happening in Europe. There's a great community building. And so it's my wish to connect, with the guys from America to network and to drop some knowledge into Europe. So first I want to introduce you, James. To anyone who does not know you, you are the rogue health economist. You're a serial founder in the functional medicine space. You're the impresario of the Functional Forum. You're a founder of New Health. You're a podcast host of various projects. I don't even know how many podcasts are you running currently?
Quite a few.
So, but I think one of the most exciting projects for me is the Big Bold Health podcast with Dr. Bland. Since when, how long is that rolling, James?
About a year, yeah.
Okay. And currently your current project is Find Functional. So you are a true digital native, I would say. And you're on all the different channels. You're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter. And where do you get your drive and purpose from, James? Let's start with that.
It's evolved over time. I think it started I was kind of the weird kid at school that did natural health. It was forced upon me by my parents. I was the only kid in school who knew what a chiropractor was. My mum insisted that I was the only kid in school who they had to call my mum before they would give me antibiotics. And I just didn't realize that that was abnormal until I realized no one really knew what that was going on. And then I kind of had a rebellious phase and I went to university and I did health economics and I thought I needed to be an investment banker. And during that process of doing health economics training, I started to see, that there were these huge long-term systemic issues that were going to drive, bankruptcy, all kinds of problems, whether it be in the UK and their health outcomes. Like in 2003, the speed at which health costs were growing in the UK was actually like exponential. Like if you looked at it on the curve, it was really going upwards. And then America was always the most embarrassing example of spending a lot but getting no return on investment. And then other countries were sort of starting to show the same kind of signs, that as we started to move from acute disease to chronic disease, that there was that there's this massive shift in costs. And that is still happening to this day in all of those countries I've mentioned, and many other countries that are now westernizing, like India, South Africa, China. And so, I had a kind of a moment of clarity. I was about 6 months into working for an investment bank. I got the best job out of all my friends. I had the most, was getting paid the most, my first year in London, having a great time. And I just sort of had an awakening to the fact that something about my childhood, growing up in community, being in a very different medical operation, I thought, okay, there's at least a chance that some of that knowledge that my parents had, could be a solution to bigger problems. And just to give you one example, suddenly out of nowhere, antibiotic resistance is a huge topic. And I was like, how did my mom with no medical training, predict this by 30 years? And why was it sensible, even in the 80s when I was a kid, to not be using antibiotics over and over again? And as those thoughts started percolating in my head, I was like, okay, I think I could have something to offer. And I dived in, I moved to America. And at that point, I wouldn't say that I was passionate about it, like I was interested in it. But then I started working in a clinic and I saw people reverse their chronic illness. And that was based on, one, people starting to really understand themselves and understand their own body. Two, by, you know, actually doing the things every day that actually create health rather than create disease. And in many cases, that led to a significant transformation in people, not just getting off their medication, but like looking very different. And actually, in a lot of cases, having a very different outlook on life and relationships and work and, you know, all these different things. And I suddenly realized, okay, there's something really magical happening here. And I wanted to learn, you know, I had had a N=1 experience. Like I'd worked in one clinic and I wanted to see what other clinics that were doing a similar type of medicine this looked like. And I took a job as a salesman and I was selling to doctors doing this. And that was really where I got
Was this around 2014, 2013?
No, this is 2007.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so I moved in 2005, 2007 to 2009. I was like hardcore salesperson, making 40 phone calls a day, calling doctors, meeting doctors, seeing what they were doing in their practice. And then in 2010 was really when I started to sort of share some of my own ideas, which was really in the first iteration, helping doctors to like think about how to run their practice more efficiently in this new paradigm. Right? If you need to get people to do stuff, to participate in their health, your clinic actually looks very different, right? You need to do education. You need to motivate people. You need to make it easy for them to make changes. And so, you know, the internet was sort of coming online. The internet was becoming really useful. Useful tools were being built, like email automation. And so we just started, you know, started a practice management company. And, you know, to answer your question, clearly, you know, my passion grew as I realized that I was in the right place at the right time with the right info. And that, you know, if you look at that last 10 years, like right now, I couldn't be more certain that what we're doing here is the solution that everyone's kind of like, oh, what are we doing? I can't believe it. Like, what should we do? And I'm like, look, it's right here. It's right in front of you. I've written 2 books on it. And so, you know, the passion comes from realizing that, you know, what we're talking about here is the solution to many, many different ills in society, one of which being the cost of chronic disease.
Yeah. I mean, if you really look at it, I think transforming the healthcare sector is maybe one of the most challenging things to do because there's so many different stakeholders and interests at play. Would you agree with that? Like on a level of economics and on a level of politics, there's so much regulations and entrenched stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an area that's not that easy to change, but it's also like the area where the change has the biggest sort of knock-on positive effect throughout society. And so, you know, that's why I'm really excited and committed. And also, you know, we're running out of time where we can keep doing things the same, right? There's definitely a clock that's ticking. And I think that works in our favor because many people are realizing that that's the case.
What's the time frame, James? What's the time frame? For example, you know about the US. What's the time frame you see in terms of the chronic illness healthcare cost tsunami arriving at our shores? I mean, Dr. Hyman talks about the tsunami there coming at us. What are the numbers there?
I mean, it's already here. I mean, US businesses are not very competitive because they have to pay the health costs of their members. I mean, really, if you look at America, there's this amazing graph that shows from the 90s, you know, from the like 40s to the 70s, you know, the average production, as production per hour of labor went up, payment went up. And then in 1970, there was this divergence where labor productivity kept going up and wages were stagnant pretty much for 50 years. Now, some of that was just businesses taking more of it and more profit for the business, but a lot of that was healthcare costs. And healthcare costs, massive increase. And the fact that in America, almost uniquely, the company bears a lot of the burden of the healthcare costs. You know, all of that value that some people would argue should have been going to the workers themselves, has been used to pay for the workers' healthcare. And so, you know, that's the last 50 years, you know, and ultimately we're already at a sort of a breaking point. And yet, like, we haven't seen the worst of it yet. Like, we have the sickest children, you know, that we've ever had. And, you know, in traditional healthcare models, the healthy 0 to 40-year-olds make up for the like unhealthy 40 to 80-year-olds, like the cost of each different like sort of decade, so that people who are 80 plus cost the most, and then 70 plus and 60 plus. But in traditional models, it's like, well, not traditional, but in the last, you know, let's say 100 years, it's the fact that everyone between 0 and 40 is healthy means that, like, you know, if you average it out, it's affordable. Well, that's
changing.
That's changing, right? And you have unbelievably unhealthy kids and unhealthy, you know, people my age who have a lot of chronic illness. I'm 39. And so, you know, that is an impending tsunami.
Right.
And so I would say, you know, you've got what, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, depending on like the severity of what's happening. And also you start to see, you know, something like you know, COVID comes along and sort of lays very clearly that, you know, that we've been underestimating the cost of having chronic disease, because yes, chronic disease and chronic disease medication costs by itself. But, you know, look at the outcomes of America compared to every other country with COVID, and you see America has a lot of problems because, one, you have a chronically ill population. Two, you have a whole population where the vast majority of them are on pharmaceuticals, and that lowers the natural immunity or the sort of immune resilience. So, you know, it's sort of like laying bare the fact that all of our calculations have been off by an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
I got this really nice quote from you. You made me aware of it, that it's the first generation right now where potentially the parents will see that their children might die before them because of disease.
Not before them, but like they will live, you know, I mean,
less
it's not
resilient.
30 years less, but, you know, they would live, their life expectancy would be lower. I mean, that's already happened. Literally the first time in history that life expectancy has come off and started to drop. And so, you know, economists like me and other people who understand statistics would see, okay, in the 40s, you know, the last 100 years, you see life expectancy going like this. When it starts to drop off, right, when the speed of growth starts to drop off, you know that you have some problem brewing, because why is the speed of growth dropping off? When it starts to go down, having leveled off, you know, you're already, you know, way into the problem, because the factors that have led to the slowness of growth have now taken over to such an effect that now we're on the way down. And that's where we are now. First time in human history. Like, the only time that, you know, life expectancy has gone down in the past was from war. Now this is from, like, you know, deaths of despair, like opiate addiction, and deaths of, you know, the social determinants of health really not being met for most people. And that is, like, truly tragic. And ultimately, if that's not a wake-up call, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. So what I so appreciate about your work is that incredible clarity on the solution, that you say we need to leverage technology to scale education. We need to leverage in terms of expanding their doctors. We need to empower them to have coaches to help patients to get better. And the third level now that is coming to the equation is community. Can you talk about these three pillars of functional medicine care?
Yeah. So, you know, ultimately, I guess those are the three things that I see that need to take functional medicine from where it is now in order for it to be affordable and scalable enough for it to solve the problem and have an impact at the population level. The first thing we need to talk about is that we need to have an operating system of medicine where the goal is health. And that's not the goal of the modern healthcare system. The goal of the American healthcare system, and to a lesser but still really relevant degree every other system, is profit. And so when people say, oh, the healthcare system's broken, like my favorite phrase that I learned from one of my colleagues is, it's not broken, it's fixed. It's fixed, like it's
Yeah.
been fixed
Yes.
to create profit for the people that supply the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Right. And so once we understand that, then we understand, okay, yeah, it's not broken. It's not like, oh, it's broken. Like, can we piece it back together? It's fixed. But the goal that it's fixed around is not health. The goal that it's fixed around is profit. And so ultimately what we need to do is to realign health systems around health. And what do we have to do first and foremost? We have to get really clear what the goal is, right? And part of the reason why I gave my talk on the blue zones, my TED talk in 2015 focused on blue zones, and we've spoken a lot about community and these kind of things, is that there are obvious examples in the world of what the goal should be, which is people living independently into their 9th and 10th decades without chronic disease. If that's not the goal for you, we're having completely the wrong conversation. Because lifetime dependence on medication and like someone living a little bit longer, but then like having to be on 8 medications and being in a walker,
Not
like
very attractive.
that's not really the future that I see. That's not the goal that we're shooting for, right? So the goal, first of all, has to be clear. And the goal to me is, is independence, health, self-efficacy, locus of control, return from the medical system to me, responsibility for the health on me, a supportive community of other people to help me, contain that. And ultimately we still have an incredible system for, for trauma and infection and all the like acute things. Like we're already quite good at that. That's what
we're
led
amazing at that. Yes.
This increase in lifespan. And so now it's about realigning the health system to health. And so the operating system, the reason why I chose my positioning in the market for me now taking my ideas forward, the reason why I chose functional medicine is 1, the goal is health. 2, it's a sort of a common language where multiple practitioners who all think the same can operate together. And what happens when you have a common language? 1, practitioner teams can be effective because you can't have a team. You can't be on a team without a common language, right? And then 2, look at the last year, October 2019, Journal of the American Medical Association, functional medicine outperforms family medicine by like a significant margin in 6 months. And that was in JAMA. And the only reason why that's possible, the only reason why that's possible is because everyone's doing it the same. Right. And that's a big thing that we see, is that if people aren't doing it the same, and if people are just artists, which is I understand, it's not possible to get those kind of results. And so what we start to see now is that, okay, we're getting the proof is being delivered over here, and amazing work at the Cleveland Clinic to like prove that out. But now we've got to build an architecture and a structure that can deliver that kind of care and have it impact at a population level. And the 3 things you said are absolutely right. Like technology has to be a part of that, and we're seeing technology and healthcare merge. The first iteration of the digital tech world was more about digital and not really about health. And so now you're starting to see people realizing, oh, we need to really focus on health creation here rather than just like data and whatever.
Yes, yes.
Coaching is a big part because ultimately we have to change behavior. Like what I'm suggesting is that we have large scale behavior change where people don't eat themselves into type 2 diabetes and smoke themselves into lung disease and, stress themselves into every other disease. Yes. And so, we need behavior change, and coaching is really designed for that. Modern medicine doesn't need to change behavior if you're just giving out drugs. You just need to like enforce the protocol, right? And so, we need health coaches. And then, ultimately all of that is great. And we've had a bit of that already, but it's really unaffordable because, we're going to have to invest these resources into this like healthy-ish community of, 0 to 50 in order to change their long-term health outcomes. Well, we can't invest a ton of money in people who normally cost nothing because ultimately, it has to be affordable for the masses. And that's where the group came in. And that's been sort of the last section of my advocacy, and my focus for this year has really been on that there's something very powerful about the group dynamic, and that ultimately the best dynamic for long-term behavior change is a supportive group. And that ultimately in a group model, you can now deliver functional medicine with coaching, with technology in a structure that is affordable, that is profitable for profit-making entities to deliver, that, you know, can be done on, you know, whatever plan. And, you know, once people experience being seen by a group of their peers and being acknowledged and being supported, you know, people love it. Like that, this is the most missing category of human experience that we're all missing. And now we've all become acutely aware of during COVID.
Right. Tell me a bit more about the research that is being done out of the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio.
Yeah, so I actually have kind of a very personal connection to all of that. So just as a, you know, when I started my show, The Functional Forum, in 2014, the first time that we got the streaming working, you know, the 4th episode, Mark Hyman came. He had flown in right from Cleveland that day. When I booked him to speak, you know, I didn't know what he was going to speak about. And we, you know, he had a few ideas. And then he announced that it was happening, the first thing on our show. And suddenly, like, it just propelled my show into being sort of an interesting media channel for people interested in functional medicine.
It was the beginning of the collaboration where Mark Hyman
got when he announced that the Cleveland Clinic was going to start a functional medicine center, which was I can't even underscore what a big deal that is.
Yes.
Like, really
because competing business models, right?
Yeah, like also an organization that's known for innovation, an organization that other entities look at to be like, oh, Cleveland Clinic are doing it, why aren't we?
Yes.
So that was the first step. And so for the first 3 years, it started small. It was like a pilot project. Mm-hmm. And, you know, very quickly, news spread. Mark was like infecting everyone in the Cleveland Clinic with these ideas through grand rounds and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly there was a 2,000 person waiting list. And they couldn't get through the people quickly enough. And there was no chance that they ever would, based on the number of people who were adding to the list and how quickly they could get people off the list. So they decided to start doing groups. And essentially you could qualify to see one of the doctors by going through a 10-week, 2-hour-a-week group run by health coaches, dietitians, and physicians' assistants, some of whom have no training in functional medicine before they start. And the results are so spectacular that it just was like, that's what made me write my second book, The Community Cure, and really look out into the whole community and see what the best practices were for groups. Because ultimately I realized, like, finally, here's a model that solves the biggest problems of functional medicine. Like, it's not affordable, it's super inefficient and slow, you know, it's based on behavior change that is not really working in any reasonable scale and any reasonable certainty. And that, like, the training time to get practitioners up to a point where they could actually get good results with it was just like concertina too. And so, you know, that's all the things that I saw there. And I just, once I realized the implications of it, I was like, we got to go hard on this. So yeah, technology, coaching, and groups are the 3 ways that we bring functional medicine to have a population impact. And honestly, we talked about that on the very first functional forum. So I've been 6.5 years kind of pounding the drum. But you know, ultimately it's exciting to see. I mean, it's happening. There's a functional medicine doctor in every city in America. You know, there's more organizations that are taking on these ideas. And so I'm psyched to see the momentum and evolution.
So, but you were the guy who brought the community model together into the functional medicine scene. Could you say that, James? Like that because you were saying that you were innovating at the cross section of functional medicine and community. Because you said as well, you were like the new kid on the block.
I'd been a sales rep for 6 years before, right? So what I realized was there was actually a ton of value in getting local practitioners together, because the cross-pollination of ideas in these meetup groups was really valuable. And when I was a salesman, like, one doctor would tell another doctor how they were using my products, and the other doctor would be like, oh, I want to get that protocol. Give me 10, you know, heavy metal protocols. And then I would be like, oh, this is great. So I saw it was good for everyone. And also it really helped to reinforce that this was the right thing to do in an era where, you know, it's still controversial, right? If, you know, most immunologists don't understand gut permeability. Even though this is like mainstream science at this moment. And if you're an immunologist and you don't understand gut permeability, you're practicing medicine from 15 years ago. You're not up to date with, if we know that 80% of the immunity is in the gut, like, and you don't know anything about the gut because that's the gastroenterologist's job, you know, I'm sorry, but that's like, you know, you need to get up to date. So, you know, one, there was like there are these positive externalities and positive feedback loops that came from creating community. So the Functional Forum was actually the community in New York. That's how it started. It was like a meetup for doctors and other practitioners and techies and whatever that were interested in functional medicine. What we started to see after the first year, because really it was really the first like content online for free that was for doctors, not for patients that doctors would watch, but for doctors. And we started to hear that doctors were getting together to watch the show. And that was great because I knew, you know, I had done literally like hundreds of tiny events in little towns all around New York and in my area where I was a sales rep. And the hardest thing to do was to get the content. So I was like, oh, hang on a minute. You know, we were putting it on YouTube. Now smart TVs were happening where you could see YouTube on your TV. And I was like, oh man, we should really like encourage this. And by the way, at this point, we have like no employees. It's just me and Gabe. And like we hired a guy to make a funnel so that we could start to speak to these doctors. But we really had very little revenue. I still had my day job. And we were doing this show once a month. So then in the next 3 years, there was just an explosion of meetup groups because this had never really happened before. Mm-hmm. You know, there hadn't been local meetups for practitioners. Some cities like LA had one. That's actually where I got the idea from Dr. Hyla Cass, who had run one in west side of LA for 10 years. There was one in Austin, Texas. There was one in Atlanta, and I'd been to all of them. And I'd like, oh, this is cool. I'd seen, so from there, I just realized like we could have like hundreds of these. So IFM, you know, got behind it in 2015, in a bigger way in 2016. And at one point, I think in February 2016, I think we had about 400 meetups on 6 continents.
And how did the connection happen with IFM? Did you guys approach them and you pitched the idea, guys, this is what we're going to do. We love what you guys do. So
we actually, in the 6th episode of the Functional Forum, we traveled to do an episode in Denver so that we could do it for the IFM team who were in Denver for one of the modules. And that's actually where I met Rangan Chatterjee too. Right. I missed my flight. On the Wednesday night, we did a Functional Forum live for the practitioners, for the IFM board. Thursday and Friday, I went to Boulder with Gabe. And on Saturday, I missed my flight to Oregon and I ended up hanging out with Rangan, and that began our friendship. So that trip had a lot going on. But yeah, so IFM, you know, what I heard from them is they were looking for a way to turn their graduates into local ambassadors, to really be an ambassador for functional medicine in their town, in their city.
And that was a perfect platform to do that from.
Great meshing point. And ultimately, you know, what you'll hear a bit later this year, we're excited to announce that we're actually going to roll out a really awesome piece of technology to facilitate.
Oh, shit.
3 employees, right? So it's not like we have 100 people. We didn't really still have a business model. We were just kind of like a media channel, and we'd sell sponsorships, but we didn't really have like a sustainable model. And so at that moment was when it sort of went up and then it kind of went down because we couldn't support all these groups. And also like, we just, some people got bored and, and we didn't really have the ecosystem needed. So this year we're going to roll out something that will sustain the meetup groups for the next 50 years or 150 years or 1,000 years. And that's going to be, yes, in America, but I already have interest from like every capital city in Europe.
Yeah, let's do it.
Around the world.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to get real. And I would say by this time next year, we could have a sort of equivalent of like Rotary Club is what we have here in America, like these different sort of local chapters. I predict that we'll have a worldwide chapter network of thousands of chapters in the next, say, 5 years. and that this will be the actual ecosystem in every country that leads to these kind of ideas making it into
mainstream,
the medical ecosystem.
Yeah. So it's like, it's going to be basically a platform any champion can plug himself into to host a local functional forum with the whole back end in it, with the event management, with potential sponsorships and all of this stuff, right?
Yeah, imagine like, you know, Eventbrite plus MailChimp plus Facebook group plus membership site plus directory in one with its own technology. And, you know, one of the things that we learned from the first thing is actually the most important person in the meetup is the person that hustles to bring the meetup together, that is calling people and making sure they're coming and whatever. And the people that have the right incentives to do that hustle are lab reps and supplement reps, because they benefit financially from the ecosystem growing. And so, you know, in our next iteration, we're going to make sure that the companies that financially benefit from this ecosystem are going to support that.
Will be behind that. Right,
yeah.
right. Amazing. So tell me, James, from the Big Bold Health podcast, how did your relationship with Dr. Bland develop? Like, how he's such a
Dr.
prolific scientist.
Yeah, like, look, he's the founder of functional medicine. He's if you've ever spent time with him, he is the most universally supportive and generous person, as far as like, you know, just always encouraging everyone. And that's not just my experience, that's many people's experience. You know, I think there was one particular functional forum that he was in, which was the February 2016 forum that I was mentioning earlier, which was the first one that was like a full collaboration live with IFM. And it was him and Kelly Brogan and a couple other people. And it was awesome. It's still like my favorite episode we ever did. And Jeff was great. And I think he realized at that point, like, we were doing something that no one else was doing, which was kind of trying to make it cool to be a functional medicine doctor, right? Aspirational and fun. And so, yeah, we just built our relationship. We hung out at a few conferences and got to spend some time together. And then in the summer of 2018, when I was in the middle of like this bus tour that I did, we got to spend half a day together, and he gave me some like incredible advice. And he actually offered me, he said he was going to start this new venture, Big Bold Health, and that he'd like me to be a part of it. And so that was the beginning. And the first thing that we did was to do this podcast, which was really to lay out some of the fundamental concepts that he wanted to lay out. And, you know, it's going in its own direction. And, you know, it's just, I wouldn't turn down an offer to, you know, participate with him. And Jeff's 74 and he's still as excited about, you know, creating world-changing solutions than he was 40 years ago. And so, yeah, it's been interesting, and it's definitely a great start. And I'm excited to see what he turns Big Bold Health into.
Mm-hmm. What are his brightest ideas in the moment that he's seeding into the community, James? What would you say? I'm so amazed at his language, the way he frames concepts like personalized precision medicine, and it's so.
Yeah, so I would say, one, precision public health. It's not his idea. If you Google it, it's out there. But this idea is that, you know, the public health in the future will not be like thinking about what's good for everyone, but will be made up of like lots of individuals being healthy. And that precision public health model is, you know, functional medicine would be the operating system for it. And ultimately, COVID really showcased the fact that if you have the same virus or whatever, you know, going on, the same stressor, you know, you have such a wide range of reaction to it, from like death to serious infection to nothing, like zero, you didn't even know you had it, to pink eye. I think pink eye is like one part of it. Or so, you know, there's this whole range. And ultimately what that shows is that there's such a varied level of immune resilience. And so ultimately individual immune resilience is where it's at. And so, you know, that's really where we're focused. And that's, I think, one of the concepts that he's really on is like immune resilience, creating, you know, very healthy and robust immune systems. So that's one idea. And I think, you know, he's really starting to speak at a bigger level towards, you know, planetary health too. that we need to take into account the fact that if the environment is causing death and destruction, and causing disease, that there needs to be a change at that kind of a bigger level. And so, the first product of Big Bold Health is a new crop that he's found that he thinks is going to be the next superfood that, independent farmers can grow to regenerate soil and to have independent livelihoods. And so he's shooting for the moon, just like he kind of always has. So
it's super
there's some good
fascinating
ideas that are coming in there, but it's also because his organizations like IFM has its own trajectory, personalized lifestyle medicine has its own trajectory, and this was his effort to be able to seed something that was slightly different than those things.
So Big Bold Health is another venture that he launched outside of PLMI.
Yeah, it's a consumer facing thing, so it's very different.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I have an off-topic question for you because I saw that you've been involved with the Mankind project.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak about that, your experience? I did this New Warrior training adventure many years ago as well. Would you like to share some of your experiences about it?
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in a community. I think a lot of men in that community did it. I had a business coach I have a business coach who I worked with for a number of years who, was in the community and was a big advocate for it. My business partner, Gabe, was really into it too. He had done the weekend and he had learned a lot from it about the different pieces. And so, when my partner died last year, it was kind of like a traumatic event, very traumatic. He was 38. It was very sudden, and it led to a lot of other weird things going on that, I just realized he would always telling me to do it. So I was like, I need to do this. So I threatened to do it actually a year before, just before I left LA. And then we went on this tour. We never did it. And it was interesting because I was writing the book, The Community Cure, at the same time. And so, the Mankind Project for me is a weekly get together with emotionally mature men to discuss areas and process things from the week, to process, all of the stuff that comes up. It's emotionally mature men, I would say. There's definitely a part of really understanding shadow and understanding the sort of unconscious things that drive your behavior. And it's been incredible for me. And, one of the things I would say is, I thought before that everyone should be in a group, and my experience with groups and that kind of thing was things like CrossFit, right? Working out in groups. But now what I realized from this is that there's a deeper level that everyone needs to. And it's a perfect example of my thesis in the Community Cure, and that thing costs nothing, right? We pay, I think, $2 a week in order to give money to the church that we do it in. But now we don't even do it on the church. We do it on Zoom because we can't meet in person. We meet every week. So then, so it doesn't cost anything. For me, it's been transformational in my understanding my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kid, my relationship with other men, my relationship to my word, right? To how valuable accountability for sure. That's the biggest thing is accountability, and I know that that's a big part of coaching in groups. But for other men in the group, it's meant drastic changes in their health, losing weight, eating right, exercising, because they're now accountable to a group of their peers. So for me, I see that not only is it awesome, but it's also a scalable solution for transforming the habits of men.
Yes, because I think male mental health is a huge topic that is not really being talked about a lot, isn't it?
100%. And this
we're like a dying species.
Yeah.
Suicide rates amongst men are ridiculously high.
Exactly. Yeah. So, if everyone was, that, and I guess one of the things that my experience is that it's been so great, and I wish that everyone could have this experience. And I think that there's going to be a moment where the elders and people who have been part of that group can facilitate a rapid expansion of those kind of communities. So I'm glad I'm in it. I'm like a lifer now for sure. And, yeah, I really respect the men in my group, and I'm the second youngest in my group, and so I see, I see what kind of impact it's had on some of the men who have been doing it for 20 years.
Mm-hmm,
And it's powerful.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, yeah, we talked about this. What is the most important event you would say for the global functional medicine community? To go back onto that topic, what do you think? What are the events? I mean, now because of COVID, of course, everything is shifting online. But what for us here in Europe, which channels should we really plug into? What do you recommend?
Well, look, the good news is that, there's all the education is going online. So you don't have to fly to America anymore. I mean, for all the people who got their IFM certification from England and Europe over the last 15, 20 years, like the people who, they had to hustle to, the Marriott
Fly over.
or the, whatever hotel it was being held at, Hilton in, Baltimore, to get their training. And now you don't. So, so now you can get all the education online. I'm biased, but I would say, look, early on in the movement, you need a supportive community of other professionals to give you enough confidence to walk into meetings with your peers and others to say, look, hey, you can reverse autoimmune disease. Look here, like this is the emerging model of how that's possible. And I think that, I would bias to say that, like, the most important thing to plug into is going to be these communities, because ultimately you can get everything online, and and it's going to be easier and easier, and there's going to be more and more options. And so my recommendation is, one is finding that group, and I think mentorship will be a bigger part of the future too.
It's amazing. There's a real groundswell happening in Germany now. So I'm in contact with about 4 doctors now that are really going out into the community with this stuff, but they're facing exactly the very problems that you talked about, that they're close to burnout, and that they just don't have the systems yet, the online systems. So what, in terms of evolution of medicine, what are the online systems that you guys have been building around, for example, doctors executing on a functional medicine model?
So yeah, the first thing that we did was, obviously make the show. One of the things we realized, like this survey came out in 2016 showing that what I had seen to be true, that there's a lot of doctors that feel this is the way to go, but have a day job doing traditional medicine or conventional medicine. And so they have to try and find a way to sort of do this every day. And they'd love to do it, but they just haven't worked out how to do that. So the first book that I created was called The Evolution of Medicine, and it was really a step-by-step guide for doctors to start a super low overhead practice using technology and telemedicine and all of that. And so, that's the sort of the first step, the first guide that I made in like making the shift. And we actually have a document now called the Virtual Practice Pivot, which is a free guide on pivoting to telemedicine. And, if you're doing the majority of your work via telemedicine, the need for so much capital to build a practice,
diminishes dramatically.
Yeah. So, that's the structure. And then we started off the back of that, a community called the Practice Accelerator, which was to help a community to help doctors implement the technology required to run a practice basically online. Well, with brick and mortar plus online, but user acquisition, like new patient acquisition online. Most new patient acquisition before we came along was all being done with dinner and flyers and live events. And, we've really helped a lot of doctors understand Facebook ads and driving traffic and, using technology to acquire patients online, which, in time of COVID is absolutely crucial.
Yes.
And so, that's been a great part of the journey.
And so, because as well, I can see the amazing thing in America, what you guys have been doing is pretty much every superstar they're pumping out books, they're pumping out courses, they're so used to use info products to educate the masses. what are good steps how to write a book quickly, or how to get the message out, for example, for health experts?
I mean,
You have to niche down, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you have to, I mean, ultimately, if you're a health expert, I think where the real action is building the systems of care delivery, right? That's what, if I'm a doctor in Europe and I'm already hip to this, I want to actually start to build, like, do you really want to be a celebrity, or do you want to be someone like Robin Berzin, who built Parsley Health and is worth, hundreds of millions of dollars, and she's actually delivering care and actually reversing chronic disease? Like, that's awesome. That's far more aspirational to me than.
So you're talking about building the real structures in which the care is being delivered, and then as well going, for example, with an investment model to build big structures like this?
I just wanted to say, like, I don't think writing books is the be all and end all. Now, for practitioners who want to go in that direction, actually, we've, done a lot of content on this. The first thing is get really clear on a small group of people that you can help. One of the things about functional medicine is that you can help a lot of different people with a lot of different diseases, but ultimately people want to know that you're a specialist in their thing. And so, when we teach practitioners to build practices, we say, look, focus for the first 500 patients that you're going to bring through your office. They're going to need to know that you do something. What is that you do? And you can always get referrals of all kinds of other things that you deal with, but what do people in your area who have never heard of you, how do they hear about you, and what do you do? So, a gut positioning, or a hormone positioning, and an autoimmune positioning, or whatever positioning you want to have, so that you help these people get this result. That's critical for getting cash from people. If you're going to build it, and that's what we've seen so far. But again, and then once your demand for those services outstrips your supply, you have a choice. That initial infrastructure is the same, but then you have a choice. Do you want to, build more infrastructure to help more people, which means more overhead and more hassles and more pain, but ultimately more
impact,
story or value? Like, if you look at Robin with what she's done at Parsley Health, like, she could show systematically that people who come into Parsley Health, like, reduce their anxiety by 93%, because she's built the thing that does it. There's no book out there that reduces anyone's anxiety by 93%. They can talk about the same things, but what are we actually doing? Right? That's what I would say. But, there's a lot of people for whom, building a practice, writing a book, and, having a great career, helping people on the front lines is a great deal. And I guess the last thing I would say, Matthew, is that, the ripple effects of getting people well are so dramatic, and you will never know how much. Like, getting one person to reverse their chronic disease, you will never know, as the person who facilitated that, what the ripple effects of that are. But we live in such an interconnected world that I would just say that, you may have more impact if you just reverse one person's chronic disease per week for the next 10 years. The impact of that could be much bigger than a book that sold 1 million copies. Because, because people tell each other. And actually, the reason why functional medicine has grown sort of so quickly in the last 15 years is really because of the internet. Because before 2005, you only really got your information from one source. And now you get your information from all kinds of sources. It democratized information. And so everyone talks now. And if someone who reversed their chronic disease starts talking and builds a following, and then everyone's talking about it. So that's been really exciting.
And that's really the advocacy part. Yes, that these people who've done the journey, who made the journey, they become the advocates, and they inspire and lead other people who go through the same challenge. Yeah. James, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great, Matt. Yeah, look, thanks for having me. And I have great hopes for the functional medicine movement in the UK, in Europe, and really hope that what you're catalyzing can have a big impact. And
working hard on it. James, thank you so much.